Billy Woods and Kenny Segal, Maps album review. Let's chat about it. Hey friends, what's going on? John here from What's Spinning here tonight to chat about this latest collaborative album between Billy Woods and Kenny Segal. This is their second full-length album together. Now, if you don't know, Billy Woods is a New York-based MC, and he has been at it for, truthfully, a lot longer than I realized initially. And, you know, he's a guy that I have come to truly love and appreciate, but it wasn't always just, I don't know, I wasn't always connecting with his music. Like his debut full-length studio album, History Will Absolve Me, this followed a long line of mixtapes, and, you know, seeing the production list and seeing the guest list on this album as it, you know, it had its pretty big hitters on it, like guys that I enjoy a lot, like Lucid, his Armand Hammer buddy, as well as faves of mine like Rock Marciano. But at the end of the day, I wasn't really connecting with this album. I thought the production was solid, but he just sounded like another very gritty, grimy, NY-based NC to me. And his Dour Candy album, it certainly got me more on the right track of enjoying his stuff, even though I wasn't head over heels on this album, but it seemed a little bit more consistent. But to me, it seemed a little bit more concise. Now, I turned around almost completely with him as far as his studio albums when he released the Today I Wrote Nothing album. Billy all of a sudden was not just another New York-based MC with a gritty, grimy delivery and a real serious wordsmithsmanship, but my God, all of a sudden he was like the Lord and Savior of dreary, nihilistic, just very gritty and cutting rainy day rap. The album was mesmerizing to me, and his Known Unknowns album that he did with Blockhead, for me, was a trip to the candy store, whether it be the sort of dusty, jazzy production, or guest features from some of my favorites, like Homeboy Sandman and Aesop Rock. And while 2019's Hiding Places with Kenny Segal took me a little while to get into, it really did just drive home the fact that as far as abstract hip-hop goes, Billy's kind of the man right now. Now, his Terror Management album, this was the first time in a long time that, I don't know, I felt like a disconnect with Billy's music in a big way. I thought he sounded great, but the production just sucked. But, you know, it really wasn't that long until we heard from him again with his collaborative album with More Mother, Brass, which has, to this day, become maybe my favorite Billy Woods project. I mean, I was a huge More Mother fan going into it, but, like, they really knocked it out of the park with this thing. I mean, maybe you realized it by now, but Billy's, God, the last 10 years or so, the guy has been an enigma in abstract hip-hop. He is constantly dropping releases, trying new things, and has been really remarkably consistent with it all. Now, I wasn't that big on his Ethiops album. I mean, Billy's intense lyrics were still fantastic, but the production and the beats, once again, I just wasn't feeling it. But last year, even though I didn't review it, I did really enjoy his Church album. I thought it was one of his weirdest and most left field and truly darkest releases to date. And yes, I know this intro is a lot longer than usual, but, you know, sometimes albums just excite me. And leading up to this new album, Maps, this thing was just, you know, just really building up inside me. I said to myself, I knew I was going to love this album. And then I heard the singles, and I said, wow, I really am going to love this album. Yeah, I freaking love this album, man. This album starts off with Kenwood speakers, and it's a great intro. This is a gritty throwback to the underground sounds of the early 2000s. And you know what? A lot of this album is, and that is not a problem in my book. The grimy beat, the dusty production, and Billy on his verse just sounds so intense. This is great. And you know what? It's such an obvious, it's just such an immediate intro. Like, if you've fallen off with Billy at all, you will get caught up in a very few short minutes. It's dreary, depressive, and heavy-hitting. Let's go! And then we have Soft Landing, and, you know, shout-outs to Kenny Segal. He absolutely killed the beats on this album. Shout-outs are in order. This is just as dreary, just as tragic of a tune. This is, once again, some very emotional rainy day rap, some introspective one at that. But then we have Billy coming in with another very vibrant, very verbose verse here, and, you know, this might be a good time to bring it up. This album has a really fascinating story behind it, a really fascinating narrative diving deep into life on the road. You know, its ups, its downs, its funny moments, its more grim and lonely moments, and it's fascinating. This track is hypnotic as hell, almost psychedelic in parts, to be perfectly honest. And honestly, this chorus just ends up coming off like some really repetitive mantra at the end of it, but it really makes it hit hard. This album, in a lot of ways, is a celebration of abstract and left field hip hop and of where it's been and where it's going. Then we have Soundcheck featuring Quale Chris, and this is a much more jazzy, sort of weird hip-hop tune, but it's one that's just as poignant. I mean, this hazy beat and the samples here just brings me back to my heyday of enjoying albums from Lord Quaz himself, Quasimodo, or maybe some MF Doom. It's a great track, and Quale Chris, who I used to love the hell out of, I've fallen off with him a little bit. I haven't enjoyed his last few projects, but here he sounds nothing short of refresh. Then we have Rapper Weed, and this track has like a very blurry, very hazy aesthetic to it. A lot of this album does, but it goes along with the album's narrative. And Billy is just such a wordsmith. Every single piece of his verses just are packed with so much imagery and so much emotion, and this track is no different. And there's a huge meditative aspect to this album. When Billy locks in on a groove, you can't look away. It's mesmerizing, and Blue Smoke really caught me off guard. This track is a much more upbeat, intense, and heady jazz rap tune, but it's done really well. I mean, I'm not used to hearing Billy at such an, upbeat pace, really urgent, but it's done so well. It's actually pretty electrifying, and Kenny on production and beats here adds a well-needed drama to this track. It's great. On the other hand, Bad Dreams Are Only Dreams is Billy Woods by the books. This dreary, tragic instrumental in this very low-key, very direct, very intense verse will rattle your bones. And I have to point out, there are a lot of very short, concise tracks on this album. A good handful are well under 2 minutes. But very rarely do they ever come off as anything else but a complete thought. And that is something that I have such an issue with in modern hip-hop, but everything here sounds complete. It's not scatterbrained or short-winded, it's really concise. No, nothing seems unfinished, it just seems masterful. And Babylon by Bus featuring Shrapnel. I mean, by the time that we get here, we are getting into some dark and depressive stories about life on the road that are just getting lonelier by the minute. But this track is just as harsh between Billy and Shrapnel's verses, which are both so intense. There's some serious drama here. It's gritty, it's grimy, and most importantly, it's very real. No, I do not have a lot of bad to report here. As a matter of fact, I genuinely think this is front runner for Hip Hop Project of the Year and one of the best albums of the year that I've heard in any genre. But like The Layover, not that into it. And that actually did shock me just because this is a very jazzy, very elegant beat, which is something that I've always enjoyed in hip hop. But to be perfectly honest, and sadly so, it's kind of Billy that throws me off here. He seems a little off form. He seems like he could barely keep up with this beat. And that never happens. It sounds like he just tried to mush so much into this track and it's just kind of sloppy. But if you like it, I do get it because there are aspects to it that I do enjoy. But I do think Agriculture is the worst track here. Listen, I've said this before, there are a lot of very short, concise, very just to the point tracks on this album. But this easily sticks out the most between all of them. This is like demo quality. This sounds like such an incomplete track, and that is something that I've never been able to say about Billy Woods. Especially with just how consistent this album is. But fear not, my music friends, the rest of this album just freaking rules. We got Year Zero featuring Danny Brown. I didn't know that I needed this collaboration, but clearly I do. We get a very dark, very depressive beat on this track that actually kind of sounds like something Danny would have pulled out on his Triple X mixtape. Danny is right at home here, and Billy's verses continue to just be so jam-packed. He never says things just to say them. Every single line has a purpose, and that's how it should be. This is an all-out feast for abstract hip-hop heads. Hangman, on the other hand, it is equal parts sort of whimsical, but really suffocating as well. This beat just creeps along so slowly. It freaking slithers. And as far as performances go, This is easily one of Billy's best on this entire album, and that's saying something. And this is a thinking man's hip-hop album. You gotta turn your brain on a lot of the time with it. But the rewards, they are limitless. Then we have Baby Steps featuring Lucid and Benjamin Booker, and this is some pretty dark shit, man. The beats, the atmosphere, it is just such a dismal aesthetic. All that alongside of these lyrics that dive into just this feeling of exhaustion and life on the road. It hits so hard. That alongside of a really haunting feature from Benjamin Booker and a very tense verse from his Arm & Hammer buddy, Lucid, it makes for a great track. And FaceTime. This track blew my goddamn mind. This is a tragic, lonely track that is just erupting with emotions. It's dreary, it's very jazzy, it's also really dreamy and surreal, and Future Islands frontman Samuel T. Herring here, I mean, God, he just makes this track go to the next level. This is beyond the best track here. This is a mission statement for this entire album. It'll simultaneously one of the most immediately gratifying tracks here, but the one that I think deserves the most re-listens for just added details. Houdini is a dusty, soulful, abstract hip-hop jam that I just would have gone nuts for when I was 12. But as soulful and as jazzy as this is from a distance, Billy is just as fired up, still has the same amount of things to say, and we're getting pretty late in the album, and he hasn't run out of anything yet, and it's pretty wowing. Yeah, this album is a breath of fresh air, and Waiting Around featuring Aesop Rock is just a treat. This is a left field rap banger featuring, God, just line after line, verse after verse of just incredibly visual bars. Aesop Rock, he sounds right at home. He couldn't be more at home on this beat. And this sung hook, it lightens things up a bit. It breathes a little life into this album, not like it needed it. And on top of that, the production on this track is one of the most ballistic and off the rails and genuinely experimental things about this album, and that's saying something. New York City Tapwater, it's one of my favorite tracks here. This track was just so immediate for me. This is a dusty, bluesy hip-hop jam with production that just makes it sound so hazy, so melted, even psychedelic. And on top of that, this track is about coming home after life on the road for a while, and I just feel for Billy so much in his lyrics here. He sounds exhausted, but rightfully so. This is exactly where I want to hear him. And As the Crow Flies, featuring his Arm & Hammer buddy, Lucid, this is just icing on the cake. This is just a great finale to the album. This has been a lengthy album with a lot of ideas, but none of them are running on empty somehow. Lucid and Billy both have great verses on this track. The production is just the right balance of artsy and weird, but also really classy. I have so much great things to say about this album. You know, I've enjoyed Billy's work for quite some time, definitely since his Today I Wrote Nothing project, but between the narrative here and the themes of this album and the great production from Kenny Segal and just how focused and how raw and emotional Billy comes off on this album, that a slew of great guest features, just not only is it one of the most immediately gratifying hip-hop albums I've heard in a really long time, it's one that is going to demand so many re-listens because of so many details, and I could not be happier about that. And yeah, there's one or two ideas that don't go so well, but overall, this is easily a front runner for not only hip-hop record of the year, but just one of the best albums of 2023, by far. Feeling a decent 9 on this project, but let me know what you all think down below. If you liked the video, be sure to give us a like, give us a subscribe, and let me know down below what you would like for me to chat about in the future. And until next time, have a great day, friends.